How Daisy Bates Used Communication to Fight Racism in Schools. A documentary presented to you by Jaya Zeitler
and Kira Lynham.
Daisy Bates, the owner of the Arkansas State Press, the woman who through her newspaper guided 9 black students into an all-white high school. She used communication to change the minds of many and made schools a safe place for children of all races. Daisy Lee Gatson was born on November the 11th, 1914, to Hezekiah Gatson and her mother, believed to be Millie Riley Gatson, in Huddig County, Arkansas.
When Daisy was just an infant, her mother was sexually assaulted and murdered by 3 white men.
Out of fear, her father, Hezekiah Gatson, fled town and left his daughter in the care of his friends, Orly and Susie Smith. They soon adopted her and raised Daisy for the rest of her childhood.
Although Orly and Susie always tried to protect Daisy, they could never fully protect her from the mistreatment of black people in America in a time period where it was segregated. As a child, she faced discrimination in almost every public setting.
Daisy Bates had faced racism all of her life, but as a young child, she didn't realize just how far racists were willing to go. All of that changed when Daisy was 8 years old and she was told by her foster father, Orly, the truth about what had happened to her mother. Her mother had been the victim of a racially motivated hate crime. She was furious and wanted to change things. From that moment forward, she knew what she was born to do. Daisy Bates was born to change America, and she would go on to do just that.
In 1942, Daisy moved from her hometown of Huddig, Arkansas to Little Rock, Arkansas. There she and her newlywed husband, Lucius Christopher Bates, or L.C. Bates, would found the Arkansas State Press. This was a weekly newspaper that was dedicated to the ongoing civil rights movement. The newspaper began to gain popularity and frequently dedicated articles towards fighting school segregation. Soon, that would become its main focus, along with other topics such as police brutality. This became the way Daisy Bates used communication to fight racism in schools.
She and her husband, L.C., then joined the NAACP. This organization fought for the equal rights of black Americans and brought attention to issues of racism all across the country. Soon, she would become president of this organization and would play a crucial role in the desegregation of Arkansas public schools. Although her husband was also involved with the NAACP, he was not as vocal about the civil rights movement as Daisy Bates was. He mainly focused on editing and publishing their newspaper.
The U.S. Supreme Court outlawed the segregation of public schools in America in 1954. From a legal standpoint, children of any race were allowed to attend public schools together, and segregation was not allowed. However, in Arkansas, that was not the case. The governor at the time, Orville Faubus, was not allowing black students to attend white schools. He even went so far as to defy the 1955 ruling to desegregate schools immediately. With a governor that was unwilling to desegregate Arkansas schools and many white citizens who did not want black students to attend their schools, very little progress was being made.
Mrs. Bates and the NAACP were determined to change that. Daisy Bates used her newspaper to communicate her fury. She recalls publishing article after article threatening to take the Arkansas School Board to court if they did not start to desegregate schools immediately. She is also seen on multiple occasions protesting for the rights of black school children. Eventually, the governor agreed to allow the desegregation of Arkansas schools, but refused to provide any help in the matter, putting the task of desegregating schools in the hands of Daisy Bates and the NAACP. They started to construct a plan. They were slowly going to desegregate Arkansas schools, starting with its largest school, Little Rock Central High. They planned to send a small group of black students to the school. Ultimately, they chose a group of 10 14-year-olds, their names being
Melba Patillo Beals, Minnie Jean Brown, Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Gloria Ray Carlmack, Carlotta Walls Lanier, Telma Mothershed, Terrence Roberts, and Jefferson Thomas.
The 10th child, Jane Hill, ended up leaving early and alternatively attended Horace Mann High School. With Jane gone, there were 9 students left. They would go on to be known as the Little Rock Nine.
And with the guidance of Daisy Bates herself, they were bound to make history. On September 4th, 1957, the NAACP launched its plan. Daisy Bates and the Little Rock Nine arrived at Arkansas Central High School. Unfortunately, the Arkansas governor Orville Faubus had found out about the NAACP's plans. He ordered the National Guard to stand outside the high school and prevent the 9 students from entering the building. Along with the National Guard stood an infuriated crowd.
Despite all of this, the children managed to remain calm. Daisy recalls feeling quite the opposite. In fact, she claims to have been worried about the children. She is quoted saying, "If something were to happen to any one of those children, I would feel personally responsible for it." Because of what had happened to the Little Rock Nine, they began to gain attention from all across the country. And in the following weeks, the events of September 4th were noticed by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Therefore, he sent federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, not to stop them, but to escort the Little Rock Nine into the school.
Finally, on September 25, 1957, it happened. The Little Rock Nine would attend an all-white high school and would make history.
The Little Rock Nine attending Central High sparked chaos all across the country. We held an interview with Janet Vernon. Mrs. Vernon was the daughter of Fred Martin Jr., who was the principal of a school in Arkansas. In the interview, she talked about how the Little Rock Nine sparked chaos all across Arkansas, and she recalls watching the Little Rock Nine being kicked and spit out on television. Just weeks following the Little Rock Nine movement, black and white students were attending schools that used to be for the opposite race. Mrs. Vernon recalls white students joining their school, and there being a very tense atmosphere surrounding them. She quoted that the black students would sit on one side of the classroom, and the white students would sit together on the other side. The students were brought together for many school meetings to understand one another. It took a while, she says, but they were able to build tolerance for one another.
Although Miss Bates had accomplished a great feat by successfully administering 9 black students into an all-white high school and was still leading more in, she would not have an easy path ahead of her. She would go on to face trial and end up closing the Arkansas State Press due to the overwhelming amount of threats from local white supremacists.
When they're going to pass here and blow this house to bits, we still get flooding telephone calls, the hate mail. But nevertheless, I feel if I'm going to live in this town and live with myself, I must oppose hatred and prejudice.
But no matter how many threats she received, no matter how many angry crowds gathered outside her home, or how many stones were thrown at her, she always bounced back. Daisy Bates had primarily used her newspaper to communicate her activism, but even though that was no longer available, she would find other ways to do so.
For example, she made a groundbreaking speech at the March on Washington along with fellow civil rights activists, such as Martin Luther King Jr., who she had met at previous protests.
Women of this country, Mr. Randolph, pledge to you, to Martin Luther King, Roy Wilkins, and all of you fighting for civil liberty, that we will join hands with you as women of this country. We will join hands with you. We will kneel in, we will sit in until we can eat in any counter in the United States.
However, there were some moments in her life when communication was not an option. In 1959, Daisy Bates was questioned by city officials for the names of NAACP members. They insisted they needed to reveal the names to check its tax status. She refused, considering that she, an openly disclosed member, had been receiving death threats due to her involvement. She was arrested and fined. She later took the city of Little Rock to the Supreme Court in November of 1959 in a trial. This case is now known as Bates v. Little Rock. She argued that the name of each and every member was not necessary and that there was no proper reason to see the tax status of the NAACP, and that it was a violation of the Constitution. The court ended up ruling in her favor, and a Supreme Court member later stated that the petitioners cannot be punished for refusing to produce information in which the municipalities could not constitutionally require. Daisy Bates led a life of activism that would affect many generations to come. She would eventually go on to win the Medal of Freedom, and the state of Arkansas would declare the third Monday in February Daisy Gatson Bates Day. However, awards were not the most important part of her legacy. Whether you know of Daisy Bates or not, she had a huge impact on how the school system works today. And thanks to her guidance of the Little Rock Nine, almost all Southern schools would finally become a safe and accepting environment for Black students. She used communication to fight racism, whether that was speeches, protesting, or the press. She would always let the world know what Daisy Bates had to say. And this is how Daisy Bates used communication to fight racism in schools.